Several years ago, a big hurricane washed ashore in Chesapeake Bay, where I have a small cottage about 35 miles south of Annapolis. And the next morning, we got up, and our neighbor across the street, they are on the water. There's about a 20-foot bluff down to the water. All of their front lawns were gone. They were all going to have to spend $250,000 bringing in hundreds of trucks of landfill and railroad ties to rebuild their property, to save their homes. My neighbor Jinx, there he is. What used to be a lovely, spacious lawn is gone, and his house is precariously on the edge of this bluff. And I'm over there, and we're looking down at this, and I'm commiserating as a kind neighbor would do. And I said, "Oh, Jinx, this is terrible." And he had his hands behind his back, and he's looking over the precipice, and he says, he says, this guy was a Vietnam War pilot, and he's got grandkids. He said, "Well, Scott," he said, "the hurricane took my lawn, but it gave me a beach." And I looked down there, and sure enough, there was a sweet little beach where there had never been one before. And I could imagine him and his 3 little grandkids down there, building sandcastles. Here he is facing a $300,000 loss. And what he says to me is, "Well, Scott, the hurricane took my lawn, but it gave me a beach." Recently, I had a long conversation with one of the members of River Road who's been diagnosed at 60 years old with diabetes. And I was expressing to him my sorrow over this diagnosis and commiserating with him as well. And Bob looked at me and said, "Well, Scott," he said, "honestly, this diabetes is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I've taken a look at my life. I've changed my diet. I'm now exercising. I've lost 40 pounds. I feel better than I ever have. I thank God that this diabetes came along. I thank God for what has befallen me. It's helped me move to a better place." For most of my adult life, and Fred knew me during these years, I was an avid runner, marathon runner. I ran half a marathon every day, 7 days a week for 25 years. A friend once said to me, "Why in the world did you do that?" And I said, "Well, because I could. But I can't anymore. My knees are," as my orthopedic surgeon said, "Scott, your knees are," want a diagnosis? "They're shot." They are shot. But as a result of this, I have taken up cycling. And whole new worlds of joy have opened to me in cycling. I've gone across the country twice on charity rides with fairly large groups of people. I commute every morning. I see all the slow traffic trying to fight its way into Washington on these crowded roads with horns blowing, and I'm on this paved trail looking at great blue herons and other people out cycling in the beautiful Potomac River. Cycling, because I've had to adapt, whole new worlds of joy have opened to me. I don't need to run anymore, even though I still dream of doing it. I have adapted. And speaking of cycling, many days, usually when I'm headed home or out in the afternoon, I'll see a guy, he's about 50, on a cycle. He's utterly remarkable, except he has this special kind of cycle. It's a recumbent bike, but it doesn't have foot pedals. It has hand pedals. He's got this thing right in front of him. He's a paraplegic. He's lost use of his legs, but he's got the biggest, happiest grin on his face, wildly pedaling down the trail as though everything was just fine. Every time I see him, the words of Albert Camus come to mind. Yes, there are deprivations which give rise, these deprivations, to the worst sorrows. But what does it truly matter, Camus writes, when what we have lost is not yet used up? There are so many things, he writes, susceptible of being loved that surely no discouragement, no loss can be final. To know how to suffer, to know how to love, and when everything collapses, pick it all up again, simply richer for the suffering, happy almost in the awareness of our difficulty. In a similar vein, New York Rabbi Harold Schleweis writes this story poem about violinist Yitzhak Perlman. It's about a concert he and his wife attended in New York City. We have seen Yitzhak Perlman, who walks the stage with braces on both legs, on 2 crutches. He takes his seat, unhinges the clasps of his legs, tucking one leg back, extending the other, laying down his crutches, placing the violin under his chin. On one occasion, one of the violin strings broke. The audience grew silent, but the violinist did not leave the stage. He signaled the maestro, and the orchestra began its part. The violinist played with power and intensity on only 3 strings. With 3 strings, he modulated. He changed and recomposed the piece in his head. He retuned the strings to get different sounds, tuned them upward and downward. The audience screamed delight, applauded their appreciation. Asked later how he had accomplished this feat, the violinist answered, "It is my task to make music with what remains." A legacy mightier than a concert, this. Make music with what remains. Complete the song left for us to sing. Transcend the loss. Play it out with heart and soul and might, with all the remaining strength within us. Every study of successful aging ever done says the people who remain happy and well through their lives, no matter what befalls them, are the adapters. It is those who take in new information, new limitations, and live with them well, making music with what remains, that are successful. I've been going for almost 30 minutes now. When I was in seminary, the Reverend Dr. Joseph Barth, who taught me preaching, he had throat cancer, and so he has a raspy voice. He used to say, "Kid, tell him what you're going to tell him, and then tell him what you've told him." We're at the me telling you what I've told you, all right? Life is often hard. Life is often difficult. Life is unpredictable, chaotic, and unfair for all of us. Random things happen to us and throw us for a loop, wreak havoc in our lives, monkey with our routines, render inoperative all the sure, nice rules we have in place to get us through safely. We are not in control of life's circumstance, not in control of most of what happens to us, but we are in control of our inner landscapes. We can align the camber of our hearts, which will allow us to creatively and wisely adapt. We can write new rules in the heart that will help us live with what we have. Now, some of you are going home this morning to a spouse who was too lazy to come to church this morning, perhaps, reading the newspaper with coffee on the deck, or maybe had an early tennis game. And when you come in the house this afternoon, your spouse is going to say, "Hon, what did you learn in church?" And you're going to be able to tell him or her, "I learned to play the ball where the monkey drops it." Now let's practice this. "Hon, what did you learn in church today?" "Hon, what did you learn in church today?" "Fred, I think they've got it. My work is done." Amen.